Welcome to this WiseL tutorial. In this session we're going to teach you how to create and use basic parameters in Microsoft SQL Server reporting services. What you'll learn in this session is all about how to create simple parameters. We'll show you how to add parameters to a report and then how to use those parameters to filter the results of a table. We'll show you how you can make a parameter optional and also how you can create default values for a parameter to avoid having to fill them in each time. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about text parameters and how you use wildcards to find partial matches. Briefly show you how to set the order of parameters and a couple of the downsides to that. And finally, how you can do something like conditional formatting using parameters. So let's get started. One of the most common reasons for using parameters in reporting services is to give your users the opportunity to filter the results of a report. So here we've got a simple table of film data, and we're going to give our users the opportunity to filter it based on, first of all, the running time and then the release date, and then a couple of other fancy things as well. So to do those things we need to head back to the design view. And the first thing we'll do is add a parameter that filters our table based on the running time in minutes. To do that I first of all need to add a parameter to the report. I can do this in one of two ways. I can either add a parameter to the data set, but it's slightly easier and quicker to add it directly to the parameters folder. If I right click the parameters folder and choose to add a parameter, I now get this dialog box asking me to define its properties. I'm going to give the parameter a name. I'm going to call it minruntime. So the value that we'll type in will be the minimum running time of films that we want to see. The prompt usually needs to be something a bit more descriptive because this is what your users will see. So I'm going to type in something that says show films that are at least this long. Hopefully that's descriptive enough. The next property controls what data type the parameter should hold. It's not going to be text. The data in the film runtime minutes field is a number, and as it's a whole number I'm going to use the integer data type. Everything else for the time being I'm going to leave it exactly as is. The one other useful option here is to allow null values, which means you could leave the parameter empty when you run the report. If you don't check this box, then you always have to provide a value for the parameter. So if I click OK, I'll see that I get my min runtime parameter added to the report data window. And if I run my report, or preview it, I should now see that I get my parameter at the top. At this point I can type in a number and click the View Report button. Although unfortunately at this point it won't have any effect on the table because we haven't applied a filter yet. So that's the next step. Now that we've created our parameter, the next step is to use it in a filter so that my table of results is affected by the value that I type in at the top. So to do that I need to go back to the design view again, and there are two ways I can apply my filter. I could apply a filter directly to the table. Alternatively, I could apply the filter to the data set which populates the table. I'm going to apply my filter to the data set itself. So to do that I right click the name of the data set and choose to view its properties. On the Filters tab I can choose to add a new filter, and then I can define the properties of that filter by saying, in this case, where the film runtime in minutes is greater than or equal to, and then I need to refer to the value stored in my parameter. Probably the easiest way to do this is to use the expression builder by clicking the FX button. On the dialog box that appears, there's a category called parameters, and if you select it, it will give you a list of all of the parameters in this current report. All I need to do now is double click the parameter I want to refer to, choose OK, and choose OK again. And the next time I preview my report, if I type in a number in my parameter, 180 this time, and choose to view the report, I'll find that my dataset and table is filtered properly. Now that we've got a basic parameter working, the next step is to add a slightly more fancy version. So we're going to add two further parameters which will allow us to filter our results by release date. So back to the design view and back to the report data window, I'm going to add a first parameter which I'm going to call start date. And for the prompt, I'm going to tell my user to choose a start date, and then I can change the data type from text to, hopefully obviously, date and time. I'll select OK, and I've created my start date parameter. While I'm here, I'm going to right-click the parameters folder again and add the second one, which I'll call end date. And again, choose an end date and make the data type date and time. Now the nice thing about date and time parameters is that if I preview my report, I'll see that I automatically am supplied with these calendar type controls, although I can type in a date in a standard day, month, year or month, day, year format. It's much more simple to select from a calendar grid. But before I do that, I want to make sure that my parameters are actually linked to a filter in the table or in the data set. So I need to go back to the design view again, and in the report data window, I'm going to add my filter to the data set again. So I can right click and choose dataset properties, and on the filters tab I can add a new filter. This time I'm interested in something where the film release date isn't equal to, but is between two dates. And when I choose the between option, I get two separate dialog boxes, two separate text boxes to enter the values. So in the first value, I'm going to use the expression builder again, and in the parameters list, I'm going to select start date by double clicking. I can choose OK, and then the same process for the second text box. This time it will be end date. If I choose OK and choose OK again, I can now preview my report. I have to enter values for all three parameters, and then I can choose dates for the start date and end date. It's quite laborious having to scroll forwards and backwards 1 month at a time, so a neat little feature of these calendar controls in this version of reporting services is you can click on the header at the top of the calendar to zoom out to a higher level. So if I click once, I can scroll by year. If I click again, I can scroll by decade. And then when I want to zoom in to select a specific date, I can click first of all on the year, and then on a month, and then on a specific day. So I'm going to choose to show films that last at least 180 minutes, released since the 1st of January 2000, and I'm going to just select actually today's date as the end date. If I view my report, that's the list of results that I'll see. As you start to add more parameters to a report, it can be quite annoying always having to fill in a value for every single parameter. So there are two useful ways you can modify this. The first way would be to allow a user to leave out one of the parameters perhaps, and we'll show you that using the runtime in minutes. The second way would be to set default values for parameters, so making sure that they already are filled in with a set value. So I'm going to start by showing you how to allow null values for the runtime in minutes. So to do that, we need to go back to the design view, and in the report data window, we need to right click on the parameter we want to modify. We can then choose to view its properties, and then find the checkbox that says allow null value and tick it. If I choose OK and then preview my report again, I should find that this time my parameter by default has the null box next to it, which is checked. Now if I'm going to quickly type in a start date and then quickly select an end date for my parameters. If I view my report, what I should see is a list of films where the start date and end date are being used to filter the results, but ignoring the running time filter entirely. So that's one quick way of avoiding having to fill in a parameter for fill in a value for every parameter. Now, another way to avoid having to fill in a value for each parameter every time you run a report is to set a default value for the parameters. And we're going to do that for both of our date parameters. So again, we go back to the design view, and in the report data window, right click on the parameter that we want to modify. I'm going to modify my start date parameter and choose to modify its properties. On the dialog box that appears, we need to select the default values tab. And I have three choices. I'm going to choose the one that allows me to specify a value for the parameter, and then I can click the add button and then specify the value that I'm interested in. I can quickly type in a simple date here. I'm going to type in a fairly early date. I think the earliest film in my database is in 1933, so I'm going to enter a fairly early date, which should always allow me to handle the earliest film. It's unlikely I'll add any films that are earlier than that date. I can choose OK, and then I'm going to also set a default value for my end date parameter. I right click and choose parameter properties, and head to the default values tab again and specify a value. I'm going to add one, but this time I'm not going to type in a fixed value, because I might be adding further films in the future. I want to make sure that my default value always remains current, so it always sets itself to whatever today's date is. The best way to do that is using the expression builder. If I click the FX button, I can delete whatever's in the dialog box already, and then use the common functions section and the date and time category, which you'll be fairly familiar with if you've watched our videos on creating calculated fields. The function that I want to use is called today, so if I double click on that, it types in the syntax, or most of the syntax of the function for me. The one thing that I do have to do is close an extra set of round brackets at the end. If I then select OK and OK again, I know that that parameter will always calculate what today's date is. So if I finally preview this report one more time, I should find that my start date and end date parameters are filled in automatically, and I'm allowed to leave my running time value as null. So viewing my report will immediately show me some values in the results. So far we've seen how to use numbers and dates in parameters. The next step is to show you how to work with text, and in particular I want to focus on how you use wildcards to find partial matches for text. So I'm going to head back to the design view, and in the report data window I'm going to add a new parameter which will allow us to enter part of a film's name. So the name of the parameter will be called film name, and the prompt will be something like type in part of a film name. The data type is going to be text, and I'm also going to allow a blank value, which is different to allowing null values. You only get this option when you have a text parameter. If I allow a blank value, it means I'm allowed to pass in a zero-length string or an empty string, which is going to be quite useful for what we're going to do shortly. At this point, if I click OK, I can then add a filter to my data set. To begin with, I'm going to filter it so that, on the Filters tab, if I add a new filter, so that my film name is equal to the value of my parameter. So I find my parameters list in the expression builder, double click the film name parameter, choose OK, and choose OK again. I can go back now and preview my report. I'll have my extra parameter. If I type in an exact film name, so let's pick a good one. There we go, Die Hard. And if I hit the View Report button, as long as all of the other parameters are met, I've left the runtime empty, and it falls between my start date and end date. And as long as the title matches exactly what I've put in, I'll get the film in the results. What I really want to do, though, is to be able to enter part of a film's name. And in order to make that work, I've got to tweak the filter on the dataset. So to modify the filter to take into account partial text matches, once again we need to go back to the design view, and in the report data window I'm going to right click onto the dataset and choose to view its properties. On the Filters tab, there are two things I need to change about my filter using the film name. First of all, I'm not looking for things that are exactly equal to what I type into the parameter. I'm going to look for something that is like, so it's like a partial match. On top of that, I need to make sure that whatever I type into the parameter is contained within a pair of wildcard characters. So I'm going to use the FX button to launch the expression builder. And then either side of the parameter, so in between the equal sign and the parameter name, I'm going to enter an asterisk inside a set of double quotes. Space it out with a space, and then use an ampersand to concatenate that to the start of the parameter. So the asterisk in reporting services represents the wildcard character. Because that's been built into a string of text, of literal text, I've got to enclose it within a pair of double quotes. And to join it to the parameter value, I have to use an ampersand. I'm also going to put one at the end of the parameter, so put another ampersand, and inside another set of double quotes, put another asterisk. And if I finally click OK, and OK again, the next time I preview my report, I should now be able to type in any part of a word. If I just type in the word die, for instance, and view my report, what I should find is that any film containing the word die anywhere within it will appear in my list. One final useful thing about the way we've set up our text parameter is that because we've allowed a user to leave this box empty, not to allow null, but to pass in a zero-length string, and because we've applied wildcards to our criteria, if I take away all the text from this box and choose to view the report, then I will find basically all of the films are returned. So if I leave the box blank, I'll return any film name containing any string of text. So that's how to use wildcards with text parameters in reporting services. When you've created a large number of parameters, it can be quite useful to be able to change their order. It's quite a simple process, but it's worthwhile quickly mentioning how it's done. If you go back to the design view of a report, and in the report data window, select the parameter that you want to move. So I'd like to move my film name to be the first parameter in the list. If I select it, I can then use these arrow symbols at the top of the report data window to position the parameter where I want. If I preview the report, I should find that my film name parameter is now the first one. So that's nice and simple. One slightly unfortunate feature of what I've done with this particular set of parameters, however, is that although previously we'd found that our end date parameter was being calculated properly, remember we have the expression equals today in this parameter, it won't calculate properly now until I've modified the film name parameter. Because the film name parameter can't contain null, so I'm not allowed to miss it out, the expression for end date won't calculate until I've modified something in this parameter. If I type in, for instance, a single letter and then click onto a different parameter, I'll find that the end date now calculates properly, and I can then take that letter away in order to allow me to find films with any word in their title. So something you do need to be slightly careful of. You need to watch out for the order of things. It will probably be better in this example to have the date parameters at the top and then have the film name appearing after the calculated ones. But that's just something to watch out for. So far in this tutorial, all of the parameters that we've created have been used to filter the results in the report. But for the final example, we're going to show you that you can use parameters to do conditional formatting as well, but it's formatting that's controlled by the user. So we'll create a new parameter which allows a user to type in a number, and then the number that is typed in we'll use to highlight all of the films whose Oscar wins matches that number. So if I typed in the number 11, I'd see the film Titanic is highlighted in a different colour. So to do that, once again, back to the design view, and the first thing to do is to create the parameter. in the report data window, I'm going to right click parameters and choose to add one, and I'll call the parameter Oscar wins, and for the prompt I'll type in something like highlight films with this many Oscars. The data type of this parameter will be integer. I'm not going to allow the parameter to be null, but I am going to set a default value for it. So I set a default value and specify a value of 0, say. What that will mean is that by default all of my films will be, all of the films with 0 Oscar wins will be formatted immediately as soon as the report appears. So if I choose OK, that's the basic parameter created. All I need to do now is create the format that will read in the value of the film Oscar wins parameter. I'd like to highlight the entire row of data for each film, so I'm going to select the entire row using the selector button at the left hand side of my table, and then I'm going to use the properties window to find the fill color or background color property, which is somewhere around here. And there we go, background color. It's set to no color at the moment. If I click on the drop down arrow, I can choose to use an expression to calculate the color. In the expression builder dialog box, I'm going to remove the calculation that's there, and instead I'm going to type in equals IIF and open a set of round brackets, so the if function, which you may be familiar with from a previous tutorial. My condition this time, that the expression that it's asking me for here, I'm going to ask if the film Oscar wins field, so that's the field from the dataset, is equal to the value in my Oscar wins parameter. So that's either true or false. If I type in a comma, and if that value is true, I want to apply a specific colour to the row of data. I'll colour it in this lovely lime green colour. If I then type in another comma, I need to choose a colour that films without that number of Oscar wins are coloured in. I'm going to choose basically white, so that it doesn't look as though those are coloured in at all. If I close around brackets and then choose OK, and finally preview my report, again, because of the order of my parameters, I'll need to enter anything into the film name box in order to get the end date to update. I can then remove that. If I finally view the report, I should see that all the films with that number of Oscar wins are highlighted in that lovely green colour. If you've enjoyed this training video, you can find many more online training resources at www.wiseowl.co.uk.